The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine waters of Pearl Harbor as Seaman First Class James Mitchell adjusted his uniform and prepared for what he believed would be another routine Sunday aboard the USS Arizona, December 7th, 1941, dawn clear and peaceful over the Hawaiian island of Oahu, with gentle trade winds carrying the scent of plumeria and salt air across the naval base. The battleships of the Pacific Fleet lay anchored in neat rows, their gray hulls gleaming in the early light like sleeping giants of American naval power. Admiral Husband Kimmel stood on the deck of his flagship, surveying the impressive array of vessels under his command. The Pacific Fleet represented the crown jewel of American naval might in the Pacific, with 8 battleships, numerous cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels creating an imposing display of military strength. Yet beneath this facade of invincibility, tensions had been mounting for months as diplomatic relations with Japan deteriorated steadily. In Washington, Secretary of State Cordell Hull had been engaged in increasingly fruitless negotiations with Japanese Ambassador Kichisaburo Nomura. The Japanese expansion into Southeast Asia and their alliance with Nazi Germany had created an atmosphere of distrust and suspicion. American intelligence had intercepted coded Japanese communications, but the true nature of Japan's intentions remained shrouded in diplomatic doublespeak and military secrecy. Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey was enjoying a leisurely breakfast at the Ford Island Naval Air Station when he noticed something unusual on the horizon. Small dots appeared in the clear blue sky, approaching from the north in perfect formation. At first glance, they resembled a training exercise, but something about their approach pattern seemed different, more purposeful and aggressive than the routine flights he had grown accustomed to observing. The Japanese strike force, under the command of Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, had departed from Hidokapu Bay in the Kuril Islands 6 days earlier. The task force consisted of 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, and 3 submarines, representing the most powerful naval striking force Japan had ever assembled. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda led the first wave of attack aircraft, comprising 183 planes including torpedo bombers, dive bombers, horizontal bombers, and fighter escorts. As referenced in the official Navy Department communique, released later that day, the attack commenced at precisely 7:55 in the morning, Hawaiian time. The first wave of Japanese aircraft approached Pearl Harbor from multiple directions, catching the American forces completely off guard. The element of surprise was absolute, as most sailors and officers were either sleeping, attending church services, or enjoying their Sunday morning leisure time. Seaman Mitchell was writing a letter to his sweetheart back in Iowa when the first explosions shattered the morning tranquility. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard, a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the massive battleship. Through the porthole, he could see geysers of water erupting around neighboring vessels, and the distinctive rising sun emblems on aircraft wings became terrifyingly clear. As they swooped low over the harbor, the carefully orchestrated Japanese plan unfolded with devastating precision. Torpedo bombers skimmed just above the water's surface, releasing their deadly payloads at the sitting ducks of Battleship Row. Dive bombers screamed down from above, targeting the airfields to prevent American aircraft from mounting any effective counterattack. The surprise was so complete that many American servicemen initially believed they were witnessing an incredibly realistic training exercise gone wrong. The USS Arizona shuddered violently as the first torpedo struck her starboard side, sending a massive plume of water and debris skyward. Seaman Mitchell dropped his letter and raced toward his battle station, his mind struggling to process the reality of what was unfolding around him. The ship's general alarm began wailing, but for many crew members, the warning came too late as Japanese aircraft continued their relentless assault on the unsuspecting fleet. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda circled high above the chaos, coordinating the attack and assessing the damage being inflicted upon the American naval forces. From his vantage point, he could see the systematic destruction of the Pacific Fleet proceeding exactly as planned. Battleship Row was engulfed in flames and smoke, with massive explosions sending towering columns of fire and debris into the crystal-clear Hawaiian sky. The USS Oklahoma, moored beside the Maryland, took multiple torpedo hits in rapid succession. The massive battleship began listing heavily to port as water rushed through the gaping holes. Torn in her hull, sailors trapped below decks fought desperately to escape the rapidly flooding compartments, while their shipmates above worked frantically to lower lifeboats and rescue equipment into the oil-slicked water dot at Hickam Field. The Army Air Forces faced their own nightmare as Japanese fighters and bombers targeted the neatly arranged aircraft on the ground. Colonel William Farthing watched in horror as his planes, lined up wingtip to wingtip for easy maintenance and security, became perfect targets for the attacking force. Explosions rippled across the airfield as fuel tanks ignited and ammunition stores detonated in spectacular displays of destruction. The Japanese had studied Pearl Harbor extensively through intelligence gathering and reconnaissance flights disguised as commercial aviation. They knew exactly where to strike for maximum impact: the fuel storage facilities, the repair shops, the ammunition depots, and most importantly, the battleships that represented the backbone of American naval power in the Pacific. Their planning had been meticulous, and their execution was proving devastatingly effective. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua aboard the USS Arizona maintained his composure despite the chaos surrounding him. As the senior surviving officer on deck, he began organizing damage control efforts and evacuation procedures for wounded crew members. The ship had already taken several hits, and fires were spreading rapidly through the superstructure, but Fuqua refused to abandon his post or his responsibilities to his men. The attack on Pearl Harbor represented the culmination of months of careful planning by the Japanese Imperial Navy. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the operation, had recognized that Japan's only hope of victory in a war against the United States lay in delivering a crushing blow that would cripple American naval capabilities in the Pacific and potentially force a negotiated settlement before America's industrial might could be brought to bear. As reported in the Honolulu Star Bulletin's emergency edition published that evening, the surprise attack caught not only the military forces off guard, but the entire civilian population of Oahu as well. Residents throughout the island could hear the explosions and see the smoke rising from Pearl Harbor, initially believing they were witnessing military exercises until Japanese aircraft began strafing civilian areas and the reality of war came crashing into their peaceful Sunday morning. Radioman Kyle Boyer frantically worked his equipment aboard the USS Nevada, attempting to establish communication with other ships in the fleet and with naval headquarters in Pearl Harbor. The airwaves crackled with urgent messages, damage reports, and desperate calls for assistance as the full scope of the Japanese attack became increasingly clear to those who survived the initial assault. The carefully planned isolation of the United States from the global conflict that had been raging in Europe and Asia was about to end in the most dramatic fashion possible. The sleeping giant that Admiral Yamamoto feared to awaken was stirring to consciousness in the fires and smoke of Pearl Harbor, and the transformation from peacetime complacency to wartime determination was beginning in the hearts and minds of every American serviceman who witnessed the devastating surprise attack. The USS Arizona erupted in a massive fireball at 8:06 in the morning, when a Japanese armor-piercing bomb, converted from a 16-inch naval shell, penetrated her forward ammunition magazine. The explosion was so violent that it lifted the entire forward section of the battleship into the air before sending it crashing back into the harbor in a twisted mass of steel and flame. Over 1,000 men perished instantly in what would become the single most devastating moment of the Pearl Harbor attack. Seaman James Mitchell found himself thrown against a bulkhead by the tremendous blast that claimed the Arizona. Dazed and bleeding from multiple cuts, he struggled to his feet and began helping wounded shipmates toward the few remaining escape routes. The heat from the burning oil on the water's surface was becoming unbearable, and the acrid smoke made breathing increasingly difficult as he worked to save as many lives as possible. From his command position, Admiral Kimmel watched helplessly as his Pacific Fleet was systematically destroyed. Before his eyes, the USS Oklahoma had completely capsized, trapping hundreds of sailors inside her overturned hull. The California was settling by the stern after taking multiple torpedo hits, while the West Virginia was ablaze from bow to stern. The Nevada, attempting to get underway and escape the harbor, was being targeted by dive bombers determined to sink her in the narrow channel and block the entrance to Pearl Harbor. Captain Mervyn Benyon of the USS West Virginia maintained his command. Despite suffering mortal wounds from shrapnel during the early stages of the attack, refusing medical attention while his ship remained in danger, he continued issuing orders for damage control and evacuation procedures until he finally succumbed to his injuries. His dedication to duty in the face of overwhelming odds exemplified the courage and professionalism displayed by countless American servicemen during those desperate morning hours. The second wave of Japanese aircraft, led by Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki, arrived over Pearl Harbor at 8:50 in the morning to find the harbor shrouded in smoke and flame. Despite the reduced visibility, they pressed their attack against the remaining targets, focusing primarily on the ships that had escaped serious damage during the first assault, and attempting to destroy the crucial fuel storage facilities that would be essential for any American recovery efforts. Machinist's mate Robert Scott aboard the USS Nevada worked frantically in the engine room to build up steam pressure as his ship attempted to get underway. The Nevada was the only battleship to successfully leave her berth during the attack, but her movement down the harbor channel made her a prime target for Japanese dive bombers, who recognized the opportunity to block the harbor entrance by sinking her in the narrow waterway. The civilian population of Honolulu found themselves caught in the crossfire as Japanese aircraft strafed residential areas and civilian vehicles throughout Oahu. Dr. John Moorhead at Queen's Hospital treated a steady stream of casualties, both military and civilian. As the reality of war came home to the Hawaiian Islands, the hospital staff worked tirelessly to save lives while the sound of explosions and aircraft engines continued to echo across the island. As documented in the official War Department report, compiled in the weeks following the attack, the Japanese assault involved 360 aircraft operating from 6 aircraft carriers, positioned approximately 200 miles north of Oahu. The coordination and precision of the attack demonstrated the extensive planning and preparation that had gone into what the Japanese codenamed Operation Hawaii, their attempt to neutralize American naval power in the Pacific with a single devastating blow. Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor and Second Lieutenant George Welch, 2 Army Air Forces pilots who had been out all night at a party, raced to Haliwa Airfield. When they heard the explosions from Pearl Harbor, despite orders to remain grounded, they took off in their P-40 Warhawk fighters and became among the few American pilots to engage the attacking Japanese aircraft during the raid. Their courage and quick thinking resulted in several confirmed kills and provided a small measure of hope during an otherwise catastrophic morning. The USS Shaw, in dry dock for maintenance, suffered a direct hit to her forward magazine that created one of the most spectacular explosions of the entire attack. The blast completely destroyed the ship's bow section and created a mushroom cloud that could be seen for miles. Photographers' mates throughout the harbor captured images of the destruction that would later become iconic symbols of the Pearl Harbor attack and America's entry into the Second World War. Firefighting efforts throughout the harbor were hampered by damaged water mains and the thick layer of burning oil that covered much of the water's surface. Sailors and civilian workers alike formed bucket brigades and used whatever equipment remained operational to battle the numerous fires that threatened to spread the destruction even further. The heroic efforts of these men prevented what could have been an even more catastrophic disaster. As the second wave of Japanese aircraft completed their attacks and began withdrawing toward their carrier fleet, the true magnitude of the disaster at Pearl Harbor became apparent to the survivors. The once mighty Pacific Fleet lay in ruins, with 4 battleships sunk, 4 others heavily damaged, and numerous smaller vessels destroyed or crippled. The human cost was equally staggering, with over 2,000 Americans killed and more than 1,000 wounded in the space of just 2 hours. Seaman First Class Mitchell, his uniform torn and blackened with oil and soot, continued pulling wounded sailors from the burning water around the Arizona, despite his own injuries and exhaustion. He refused to rest while men continued to cry out for help among the debris and flames. His actions that morning would later earn him the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroism. But at that moment, he was simply doing what his training and conscience demanded. The USS Nevada, despite suffering heavy damage from the concentrated attacks of Japanese dive bombers, managed to beach herself at Hospital Point rather than sink in the main channel. Lieutenant Commander Francis Thomas, the ship's navigator, had made the crucial decision to run her aground after realizing that the vessel could not reach the harbor entrance without potentially blocking the channel for other ships. His quick thinking prevented what could have been a strategic disaster for the American naval forces. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg of the USS Arizona remained at his post on the bridge until the massive magazine explosion that destroyed his ship and ended his life. Witnesses reported seeing him calmly issuing orders for the safety of his crew, even as flames engulfed the superstructure around him. His dedication to duty and his men exemplified the finest traditions of naval service and earned him a posthumous Medal of Honor. The hospital ship USS Solace, one of the few vessels in the harbor that remained undamaged during the attack, immediately began rescue operations throughout the harbor. Her crew worked tirelessly to pull survivors from the water and provide medical treatment to the wounded. The ship's white hull, marked with large red crosses, became a beacon of hope for sailors struggling in the oil-covered waters of Pearl Harbor. At Ford Island Naval Air Station, Chief Aviation Ordnanceman John Finn set up a machine gun position in an exposed area and continued firing at attacking Japanese aircraft. Despite being wounded multiple times by strafing runs, his courage under fire inspired other sailors to maintain their defensive positions and contributed to shooting down several enemy aircraft. Finn's actions that morning earned him the Medal of Honor and demonstrated the fighting spirit that would characterize America's response to the Pearl Harbor attack. The attack had lasted less than 2 hours, but its impact would reverberate throughout American society and fundamentally alter the nation's relationship with the rest of the world. The isolationist sentiment that had dominated American foreign policy throughout the 1930s evaporated in the smoke and flames of Pearl Harbor, replaced by a grim determination to bring the perpetrators of this surprise attack to justice. As referenced in President Franklin Roosevelt's address to Congress the following day, December 7, 1941, would indeed live in infamy as the date that transformed America from a reluctant observer of global conflict into an active participant in the Second World War. The sleeping giant had been awakened, and its fury would soon be felt across the Pacific as the United States mobilized for total war against the Axis powers. Communications personnel throughout Oahu worked frantically to reestablish contact with the mainland United States and inform military and political leaders of the devastating attack. The radio message Air Raid Pearl Harbor X This Is Not Drill crackled across the Pacific, carrying news of the attack to a shocked American public who had believed their nation was safely isolated from the global conflict by thousands of miles of ocean. Damage assessment teams began the grim task of cataloging the destruction while rescue operations continued throughout the harbor. The oil fires would burn for days, sending thick black smoke into the tropical sky as a constant reminder of the price of unpreparedness. Yet even in the midst of this disaster, the seeds of America's eventual victory were being planted in the determination and courage displayed by ordinary sailors, soldiers, and civilians who refused to surrender to despair. The Japanese had achieved tactical surprise and inflicted tremendous damage on the Pacific Fleet, but they had failed to destroy the crucial fuel storage facilities, repair shops, and submarine base that would prove essential to America's recovery and eventual counterattack. More importantly, they had awakened a sleeping giant whose industrial capacity and fighting spirit would ultimately prove unstoppable once fully mobilized for war. The smoke was still rising from Pearl Harbor when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt received the first reports of the Japanese attack in Washington. The president, who had been hoping to keep America out of the global conflict for as long as possible, now faced the stark reality that the decision had been taken out of his hands by the Empire of Japan. The carefully maintained neutrality that had characterized American foreign policy was about to end in the most dramatic fashion possible. Admiral Chester Nimitz arrived at Pearl Harbor on Christmas Day, 1941, to assume command of the Pacific Fleet and begin the monumental task of rebuilding American naval power in the Pacific. As he surveyed the devastation from the deck of a small boat, he reportedly remarked to his aide that the Japanese had made 3 crucial mistakes. They had attacked on a Sunday when most of the fleet's personnel were ashore. They had failed to destroy the fuel storage facilities, and they had left the aircraft carriers undamaged because they were at sea. During the attack, the recovery efforts at Pearl Harbor began immediately. After the last Japanese aircraft disappeared over the horizon, salvage operations commenced under the direction of Captain Homer Wallen, whose innovative techniques would eventually raise and repair many of the damaged vessels. The USS Nevada, California, and West Virginia would all return to service after extensive repairs, while the Oklahoma and Arizona would remain as permanent memorials to those who died in the attack. In the days following the attack, the American public's reaction was swift and decisive. Recruitment offices across the nation were overwhelmed with volunteers eager to serve their country and avenge the deaths of their fellow Americans. The isolationist movement, which had been a powerful force in American politics throughout the 1930s, virtually disappeared overnight as the nation united behind the war effort. With unprecedented determination and solidarity, the psychological impact of Pearl Harbor extended far beyond the immediate military consequences. Americans had believed their homeland was invulnerable to foreign attack, protected by vast oceans from the conflicts raging in Europe and Asia. The successful Japanese assault shattered this illusion of security and forced the nation to confront the reality that modern warfare knew no geographical boundaries. Intelligence failures contributed significantly to the success of the Japanese attack. American cryptographers had broken Japanese diplomatic codes, but had failed to anticipate the military assault on Pearl Harbor. Warnings from various sources, including radar operators who detected the approaching Japanese aircraft, were either ignored or misinterpreted by commanders who could not believe that Japan would dare attack American territory. The congressional investigation that followed the Pearl Harbor attack would continue for years, examining the failures of intelligence, communication, and command that had allowed the Japanese to achieve such devastating surprise. Admiral Kimmel and General Walter Short, the Army commander in Hawaii, were relieved of their commands and became scapegoats for the disaster, though later analysis would reveal that the failures extended far beyond their individual actions. As documented in the Joint Committee report published in 1946, the Pearl Harbor attack resulted from a complex series of miscommunications, intelligence failures, and strategic miscalculations that extended throughout the American military and political hierarchy. The disaster served as a harsh lesson in the importance of intelligence gathering, inter-service cooperation, and maintaining constant vigilance in an increasingly dangerous world. The Japanese celebration of their tactical victory was tempered by the recognition that they had awakened a formidable enemy. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, reportedly warned his colleagues that they had awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. His prophecy would prove accurate as American industrial capacity and military might gradually turn the tide of war in the Pacific. The heroism displayed by individual Americans during the Pearl Harbor attack became a source of national inspiration and pride. Stories of sailors like Dory Miller, an African-American cook aboard the USS West Virginia, who manned an anti-aircraft gun during the attack, demonstrated that courage and patriotism transcended racial boundaries and helped forge a new sense of national unity in the face of external threats. The transformation of American society in response to Pearl Harbor was remarkable in its speed and completeness. Industries retooled for war production, civilians accepted rationing and other sacrifices, and the entire nation mobilized for what everyone understood would be a long and difficult struggle. The attack had not only brought America into the war, but had created the psychological conditions necessary for total victory over the Axis powers. The morning of December 8, 1941, found President Roosevelt preparing to address a joint session of Congress that would formally declare war on Japan and mark America's full entry into the Second World War. The president's speech, crafted with careful attention to its historical significance, would transform the date which will live in infamy into a rallying cry for a nation suddenly thrust into global conflict. The industrial mobilization that followed Pearl Harbor was unprecedented in American history. Factories throughout the nation began converting from civilian to military production with remarkable speed and efficiency. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant became a symbol of American industrial might, producing B-24 Liberator bombers at a rate that amazed both allies and enemies. The arsenal of democracy that Roosevelt had envisioned was becoming a reality. Admiral Ernest King, appointed as Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet following the Pearl Harbor attack, faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding American naval power, while simultaneously conducting defensive operations across the vast Pacific Ocean. His strategic vision and aggressive leadership style would prove crucial in transforming the United States Navy from the victim of surprise attack into the dominant naval force in the Pacific. The attack on Pearl Harbor had profound implications for American society. Beyond the immediate military consequences, the Japanese-American community, particularly on the West Coast, faced suspicion and persecution that would culminate in the controversial internment program. The fear and paranoia generated by the surprise attack contributed to one of the darkest chapters in American civil liberties history, demonstrating how even democratic societies can compromise their principles during times of crisis. Intelligence gathering and analysis underwent revolutionary changes in response to the Pearl Harbor disaster. The establishment of centralized intelligence agencies and improved communication systems aimed to prevent future surprise attacks. The lessons learned from the intelligence failures that contributed to Pearl Harbor would eventually lead to the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency and modern American intelligence capabilities. The Pacific Fleet's submarine force, which had escaped serious damage during the Pearl Harbor attack, immediately began offensive operations against Japanese shipping and naval forces under the leadership of Admiral Charles Lockwood. American submarines would eventually strangle Japan's maritime supply lines and contribute significantly to the ultimate victory in the Pacific. The submarines represented one of the few offensive capabilities available to American forces. In the immediate aftermath of Pearl Harbor, training programs throughout the United States expanded rapidly to meet the demands of global warfare. Flight training schools, naval academies, and military bases proliferated across the country as America prepared to fight on multiple fronts. Simultaneously, the young men who would eventually carry the war to Japan and Germany began their military education in facilities that had been hastily constructed in response to the Pearl Harbor attack. As reported in Time magazine's 1942 year-end review, the transformation of American society following Pearl Harbor was nothing short of remarkable. The nation that had been reluctant to involve itself in foreign conflicts became the arsenal of democracy, providing weapons and supplies not only for American forces, but for allies around the world. The attack had catalyzed changes that might have taken years to accomplish under normal circumstances. The strategic implications of Pearl Harbor extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. Japan's decision to attack the United States brought America fully into the war and created a two-front conflict for the Axis powers. Germany's declaration of war on the United States for days after Pearl Harbor ensured that American industrial and military might would be brought to bear against both major Axis powers simultaneously. Scientific and technological development accelerated dramatically in response to the challenges revealed by Pearl Harbor. Radar technology, which might have prevented the surprise attack if properly utilized, became a priority for development and deployment. The Manhattan Project, already underway, received increased funding, and attention as policymakers recognized the potential military applications of atomic research. The cultural impact of Pearl Harbor resonated throughout American society, inspiring countless works of art, literature, music, and film that captured the nation's transformation from isolationism to global engagement. Hollywood productions glorified American military heroism while demonizing the enemy, contributing to the maintenance of morale and support for the war effort. Throughout the long conflict ahead, the diplomatic consequences of Pearl Harbor were equally significant. The attack united America's allies and provided moral justification for the global coalition that would eventually defeat the Axis powers. Nations that had been uncertain about American commitment to the anti-fascist cause now had concrete evidence of America's determination to see the conflict through to total victory. By the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor, the transformation of the United States from an isolationist nation to the world's most powerful military force was well underway. The shipyards of America were launching vessels at an unprecedented rate, with the Kaiser shipyards alone producing Liberty ships faster than the U-boats could sink them. The industrial capacity that had been dormant during the Great Depression was now fully mobilized for the greatest conflict in human history, the Battle of Midway, fought from June 4th to 7th, 1942, marked the turning point in the Pacific War and vindicated Admiral Nimitz's strategy of rebuilding American naval power around aircraft carriers rather than battleships. The same Japanese carrier force that had attacked Pearl Harbor was destroyed in the decisive engagement, with fleet carriers and many of Japan's most experienced pilots lost in a battle that shifted the strategic initiative to the United States. Lieutenant James Mitchell, now promoted and serving aboard the newly commissioned USS North Carolina, watched as American forces began their island-hopping campaign across the Pacific. The young sailor who had survived the Arizona's destruction had become a veteran leader, training new recruits in the harsh lessons learned at Pearl Harbor. His transformation from peacetime sailor to wartime veteran reflected the broader metamorphosis of American military forces. The technological superiority that would eventually guarantee Allied victory began emerging in the months following Pearl Harbor. American radar technology, mass-produced aircraft, and innovative amphibious warfare techniques gave American forces decisive advantages over their Axis opponents. The surprise attack that had seemed to cripple American military capabilities had actually catalyzed developments that would prove overwhelming in their ultimate application. Women entered the American workforce in unprecedented numbers as the demands of wartime production created labor shortages throughout the economy. Rosie the Riveter became an iconic symbol of American women's contribution to the war effort. But the reality encompassed millions of women who took on roles previously reserved for men. The social changes initiated by Pearl Harbor would have lasting impacts on American society long after the war ended. The final tally of Pearl Harbor's impact extended far beyond the ships sunk and lives lost on that December morning. The attack had awakened American industrial might, unified a divided nation, and set in motion the chain of events that would lead to total victory over the Axis powers. Japan's attempt to cripple American naval power had instead unleashed forces that would ultimately result in their own defeat and occupation. President Roosevelt's prediction that the Pearl Harbor attack would live in infamy proved prophetic, but perhaps not in the way he had originally intended. The date became a symbol not just of American vulnerability, but of American resilience and determination. The nation that had been caught unprepared in 1941 emerged from the Second World War as the world's dominant superpower, forever changed by the events of that Sunday morning in Hawaii. The memorial ceremonies held at Pearl Harbor each December 7th serve as reminders of the price of unpreparedness and the importance of maintaining vigilance in an uncertain world. The USS Arizona Memorial, built over the sunken battleship, preserves the memory of those who died while symbolizing America's emergence from isolation into global leadership. The lessons of Pearl Harbor influenced American strategic thinking throughout the Cold War and beyond. The importance of intelligence gathering, alliance building, and military preparedness became fundamental principles of American foreign policy. The surprise attack that had seemed to demonstrate American weakness ultimately revealed American strength and adaptability. Admiral Yamamoto's fear that Japan had awakened a sleeping giant proved remarkably prescient. The industrial capacity, technological innovation, and human resources that America brought to bear against the Axis powers were indeed overwhelming once fully mobilized. The Pearl Harbor attack had accomplished the exact opposite of its intended strategic objective, transforming a reluctantly neutral nation into a determined and implacable enemy. The transformation from isolation to determination that began on December 7, 1941, fundamentally altered not only America's role in the world, but the nature of international relations itself. The sleeping giant that awakened at Pearl Harbor would never again retreat into isolationism, accepting instead the responsibilities and burdens of global leadership that continue to shape world events to this day. The legacy of Pearl Harbor endures, not merely as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unpreparedness, but as a testament to the resilience and determination of free peoples. When confronted with unprovoked aggression, the date that lives in infamy became the catalyst for the greatest demonstration of democratic resolve and industrial might in human history, proving that even devastating surprise attacks cannot defeat a nation united in righteous purpose.